Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world that smells a little worse than you expect, sounds a little louder than it should, and feels strangely alive in ways that don't quite make sense anymore. You find yourself standing on a narrow street in a medieval town, the kind that never really appears in movies the way it actually was: muddy, crowded, and, well, let's just say your modern nose would not approve. Within seconds, you realize something important. You probably wouldn't last a full day here without seriously reconsidering all your life choices. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a cautious step forward, and your shoe sinks slightly into the street. Not because it's raining, but because the ground is a thick mixture of mud, animal waste, leftover food, and things you probably don't want to identify too closely. There's no neat separation between road and sewer here. In fact, the street is the sewer. A woman above you leans out of a wooden window and empties a bucket. You hear it before you see it: a slosh, a brief pause, and then splash. You instinctively step back just in time. Congratulations, you've just avoided one of the most common daily hazards of medieval life: being casually showered with someone else's waste. And yes, this really happened. In many medieval towns, especially across parts of Europe, people simply dumped their chamber pots into the street. Sometimes they shouted a warning, sometimes they didn't. Historians still debate how often warnings were actually given, or whether that was more of an optimistic idea than a reliable practice. You keep walking, trying not to think too hard about what exactly you're stepping on. The smell is layered. That's the polite way to put it. It's a blend of manure, rotting vegetables, smoke from nearby fires, and something sour that lingers in the back of your throat. Imagine leaving your trash out in the summer heat for a week, then adding a farmyard on top of it. Now breathe that in slowly. Oddly enough, the people around you don't seem to notice. Or maybe they do, but they've simply grown used to it. A baker pushes past you carrying a basket of bread, completely unfazed. A dog trots by, sniffing enthusiastically at something you absolutely do not want to inspect. Life goes on here, smell and all. You glance down the street and notice a shallow channel running along the center. It's meant to carry away waste when it rains, acting as a kind of primitive drainage system. When a good downpour comes, the streets briefly clean themselves. It's nature's version of hitting the reset button, though not exactly a thorough one. And here's something that rarely gets talked about. People were actually aware that filth could be dangerous, just not in the way we understand today. The idea of germs doesn't exist yet, but there's a strong belief in bad air, or miasma. If something smells terrible, it must be unhealthy. Ironically, they're not entirely wrong, just not quite right either. You pass a group of workers shoveling muck into a cart. This is someone's job, to clean the streets, at least partially. These early sanitation workers are essential, though not particularly appreciated. It's hard to imagine putting professional waste handler on your resume, but here, it's steady work. A man nearby wrinkles his nose and mutters about the stench. You almost laugh. This is the same man who, moments ago, casually tossed scraps into the street. There's a certain irony in complaining about a problem you're actively contributing to. Some things, it seems, never change. As you continue, you notice how close everything is. Houses lean toward each other, their upper floors nearly touching. This design saves space and helps support the structure, but it also means less sunlight reaches the ground. The street stays damp longer, and the smells, well, they linger like an unwanted guest. You reach a small open area where a few vendors are setting up for the day. Fresh vegetables, well, relatively fresh, are laid out on wooden tables. A butcher sharpens his knife nearby, the metallic scraping sound cutting through the morning noise. Meat hangs behind him, exposed to the open air. Flies have already found it. This was completely normal. Refrigeration doesn't exist, so food preservation relies on salting, smoking, or simply selling things quickly before they spoil. You make a mental note. If you were actually living here, you'd probably develop a very different definition of fresh. And yet, despite everything, The smells, the mess, the constant low-level chaos, there's a rhythm to it. People greet each other. Children run past, laughing, somehow avoiding the worst of the street hazards. A woman sweeps the front of her home, pushing dirt from one place to another, as if tidiness is more about effort than outcome. You pause for a moment, taking it all in. It's easy to imagine the medieval world as distant and strange, but standing here it feels oddly familiar in certain ways. People are still people. They work, complain, laugh, and try to get through the day with as little trouble as possible. Of course, you're still trying very hard not to breathe too deeply. And as you step carefully around another suspicious puddle, you can't help but think, this is just the beginning of your day. You keep moving, still carefully choosing where to place your feet, when the smell of something warm and vaguely comforting begins to cut through the heavier odors of the street. It's bread. Real bread. For the first time since arriving here, your shoulders relax just a little. You follow the scent almost instinctively, weaving past a cart piled with wilted greens and a man arguing loudly over the price of onions. The bakery sits low and dark, its doorway open to let out heat, and thankfully, some of the smoke. Inside, the air is thick, but in a way that feels almost welcoming compared to what you've just endured outside. You step in. Immediately, your eyes adjust to the dim light, and you notice the baker from earlier placing loaves onto a wooden surface. They look uneven, slightly burned in places, but undeniably fresh. If you squint hard enough, you might even convince yourself this is the cozy rustic aesthetic people try to recreate in modern cafes. Except here, it's not aesthetic. It's just survival. You approach, and without much ceremony, a piece of bread is handed to you. No wrapping, no gloves, no polite have a nice day, just bread. You hesitate for half a second, then take it. Hunger or curiosity wins. The crust is hard, tougher than anything you're used to. When you bite into it, there's a faint bitterness, maybe from the grain, maybe from the oven. Medieval bread often isn't the soft, fluffy kind, you know. It's dense, filling, and sometimes mixed with whatever grains are available, even ground peas or beans if wheat is scarce. And here's something quietly unsettling. Sometimes the flour contains traces of things that shouldn't be there. Bits of husk, small stones, or even mold if the grain was stored poorly. Historians still debate how often contaminated grain led to strange symptoms, like dizziness or hallucinations, but it's not entirely out of the question. So if you suddenly start seeing things later, well, at least you'll know why. You chew slowly, trying not to think about that too much. Nearby, a pot simmers over a fire. You lean slightly to get a better look. It's pottage, a kind of thick stew that's basically the medieval answer to just throw everything in a pot and hope for the best. Vegetables, bits of meat if you're lucky, grains, herbs, it all blends into something that changes from day to day depending on what's available. You're handed a wooden bowl without asking. Hospitality here is efficient, not overly sentimental. The first spoonful is surprisingly okay. Earthy, warm, a little bland, maybe, but not unpleasant. Then you hit a tougher piece, possibly meat, possibly something else, and you pause for a moment, reconsidering your life choices again. This is a common breakfast for many people across medieval Europe. It's practical, filling, and easy to prepare in large quantities. And unlike your usual morning routine, coffee, maybe something quick on the go, this meal is meant to sustain you through hours of physical labor. No oat milk lattes here, unfortunately. You glance around and notice something else. No one is washing their hands. Not before eating, not after. There's a shared cloth hanging nearby, but it looks like it's seen better decades, not days. You briefly consider whether wiping your hands on it would actually make things worse. Water sits in a container at the corner, but it's not exactly clear. Drinking water in medieval towns can be risky, especially if it's drawn from sources contaminated by, you guessed it, the same waste you saw outside. That's why many people prefer ale, even in the morning. It's safer thanks to the brewing process. Yes, you're basically having breakfast with a mild alcoholic beverage. Not because it's fun, but because it's practical. Honestly, some mornings today might make that sound appealing. You take a cautious sip. It's weak, slightly sour, but drinkable. You remind yourself this is considered normal. Completely normal. At a nearby table, two men talk quietly about a recent illness spreading through a neighboring town. One mentions foul air. The other suggests it might be punishment for sin. No one brings up bacteria or viruses. Those concepts don't exist yet. And this is where things get interesting. Despite the lack of scientific understanding, people are constantly trying to make sense of disease. They burn herbs to clean the air. They carry small bundles of fragrant plants. Some even wear primitive masks filled with sweet-smelling substances. You can't help but notice the effort. It's misguided, maybe, but it's still an attempt to protect themselves in a world that feels unpredictable. Historians still debate how effective any of these methods were, or whether they provided more comfort than actual protection. A child runs past your table, grabbing a piece of bread with unwashed hands before darting outside again. No one stops him. No one seems particularly concerned. You finish your bowl slowly, the warmth settling in your stomach. For a brief moment, things feel almost calm. Then you notice a rat scurry along the edge of the room. Of course, there's a rat. It disappears quickly, but not before reminding you that you're sharing this space with more than just people. In medieval towns, rats are everywhere, drawn by food, waste, and shelter. They're part of the environment, whether anyone likes it or not. You set your bowl down, appetite suddenly less enthusiastic than before. As you step back outside, the fresh air, relatively speaking, feels like a relief. The street is busier now, more voices, more movement, more life. And as you take another careful step forward, you realize something quietly unsettling. You're starting to get used to it. You step back into the street, the faint warmth of your meal already fading as the cool morning air settles around you. The town is fully awake now. Voices overlap, carts creak, and somewhere nearby, someone coughs, a deep, persistent sound that lingers just a little too long. You don't think much of it at first. People cough all the time. But here, that sound carries a different weight. It's not just a passing inconvenience. It's a question mark, a warning, maybe even the beginning of something worse. You follow the sound almost without realizing it, drawn down a narrower alley where the noise of the main street softens into a dull murmur. The smell shifts again. Less of food now, more of damp wood and something medicinal, or at least what passes for medicinal. At the end of the alley, you find a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a man sits hunched over, clutching his arm. Another figure stands beside him, older, calm, methodical. This is a healer. Not quite what you'd call a doctor by modern standards, but in this world, this is as close as it gets. You step closer. The healer doesn't look up right away. He's focused, carefully examining a swollen area on the man's forearm. The skin is discolored, slightly raised. Without much hesitation, the healer reaches for a set of tools laid out on a cloth. They're simple. Metal instruments, slightly worn, not exactly what you'd describe as sterile. You instinctively take a small step back. This is medieval medicine, and it's an experience. The most widely accepted medical theory here revolves around the idea of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. According to this belief, illness happens when these elements fall out of balance. So naturally, treatment focuses on restoring that balance, sometimes in ways that might make you question everything. The healer picks up a small blade. You already know where this is going. Bloodletting is one of the most common treatments in this period across Europe. The idea is simple. If there's too much blood, or if the blood is somehow bad, you remove some of it. Problem solved. Or at least, that's the theory. The man winces as the healer makes a careful cut. There's no anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a steady hand and the hope that this will help more than it harms. You try not to look too closely, but it's hard to ignore. And here's something even stranger. Sometimes, instead of a blade, they use leeches. Yes, actual leeches. Small, wriggling creatures that attach to the skin and draw blood slowly. Oddly enough, this method isn't entirely without merit. Modern medicine still uses leeches in certain specialized procedures. Though, to be fair, today they come with a lot more regulation and fewer surprises. The healer sets the blade aside and presses a cloth to the wound. The man exhales, somewhere between relief and discomfort. It's impossible to tell if the treatment will actually help, but for now, it's done. You glance around the room and notice shelves lined with jars. Herbs, dried plants, powders of unknown origin. Some remedies are based on real observation. Certain plants do have healing properties. Others are more questionable. For example, there's a belief that you can treat a wound with a mixture that includes wine, herbs, and occasionally things like animal fat or even ground up insects. It sounds bizarre, but in a world without antibiotics, people use whatever they think might work. Historians still debate how much of medieval medicine was genuinely effective versus how much relied on placebo or sheer luck. The truth is probably somewhere in between. A woman enters the room holding a small bundle. She speaks quietly to the healer, who nods and begins preparing something from the jars. You catch a glimpse inside the bundle, a child, pale and still. The atmosphere shifts instantly. There's a heaviness here now, a quiet tension that wasn't there before. Illness in this world isn't just inconvenient, it's unpredictable, often unstoppable. You step back, giving them space, though there's not much to give. The room suddenly feels smaller, the air thicker. Outside, life continues as usual. People pass by, unaware, or perhaps simply accustomed to moments like this happening just behind closed doors. You linger for a second longer, then turn away. As you walk back toward the main street, you notice something hanging near the doorway, a small charm made of herbs and string. It sways gently in the breeze. Protection, maybe, or at least the hope of it. And that's the thing about this world. People don't have the tools or knowledge you're used to, but they're not passive. They try. They experiment. They hold on to beliefs that give them some sense of control, even when the outcome is uncertain. You pass the same alley again, the sounds fading behind you, and rejoin the steady rhythm of the town. For a moment, you catch yourself thinking, maybe it's not just about whether these treatments work. Maybe it's about needing them to. And as another cough echoes faintly in the distance, you can't help but wonder, how many stories like that are unfolding all around you, unseen? You drift back into the main current of the street, but something has shifted. The sounds feel sharper now, the laughter slightly thinner, as if what you just witnessed has quietly changed the way everything lands in your mind. Still, the town doesn't pause for reflection. It rarely does. Ahead of you, rising above the crooked rooftops and leaning timber walls, is something that finally looks familiar in a more cinematic way. Stone, tall, imposing, a castle. For a brief moment, you feel a strange sense of relief. Finally, you think, something closer to the version of the medieval world you've seen in movies. Grand halls, noble feasts, roaring fireplaces, maybe even a place where things smell better. That optimism lasts about 10 seconds. You approach the gate, stepping over a shallow rut in the ground where countless feet and cartwheels have worn the earth down into a permanent groove. Guards stand nearby, not particularly interested in you, but very aware of everything. Their armor isn't polished to a shine. It's functional, scratched, lived in. This isn't a costume. It's daily life. Inside, the space opens up slightly. The noise changes, not quieter, but different. More contained. You hear the echo of footsteps on stone, the clatter of metal, the distant murmur of voices bouncing off thick walls. You step into the great hall, and immediately something feels off. It's colder than you expected. Not dramatically so, but enough that you notice. The stone walls trap some heat from the central fire, but not much. Drafts slip through unseen cracks, weaving through the room like invisible threads. You instinctively pull your arms in closer, as if that might help. A long wooden table stretches across the hall. It's worn, marked by years of use. People move around it with practiced ease. Servants carrying food, others clearing space, someone shouting instructions that no one seems particularly eager to follow. This is life inside a medieval castle, and it's far less glamorous than you imagined. Yes, castles were symbols of power across medieval Europe. They were designed to impress, to defend, to dominate the landscape, but they were not designed for comfort, not in the modern sense. You glance upward. The ceiling is high, supported by heavy wooden beams darkened with age and smoke. Speaking of smoke, you notice it lingering in the air, drifting lazily from the central hearth. Chimneys exist, but they're not always efficient. Some of that smoke just stays. Your eyes water slightly. Across the hall, a group of nobles sits elevated slightly above the rest. Their clothing is richer, more colorful, but even here, things aren't exactly pristine. Fabrics show wear. Hands are not perfectly clean. Status changes a lot, but it doesn't eliminate the realities of the time. You move closer, careful not to get in the way of a servant carrying a tray that looks heavier than it should be. The food is more varied than what you had earlier: meat, bread, maybe even something resembling a pie. But presentation is rustic. There are no delicate arrangements here, just abundance when it's available. And here's something rarely shown: personal hygiene doesn't magically improve inside these walls. Bathing is still infrequent. Waste management is creative. Many castles rely on garderobes, essentially stone seats built over vertical shafts that drop waste down into a pit or moat below. It's efficient in a way, but not exactly odor-free. You don't have to look far to confirm that. A faint smell lingers, less overwhelming than the street, but definitely present. It mixes with smoke, food, damp stone. A signature scent of medieval indoor living, if you will. Not likely to become a popular candle anytime soon. You walk along the edge of the hall and notice something carved into the wall. Marks, faint but deliberate. Maybe someone passing time. Maybe something more symbolic. It's hard to tell. Nearby, a conversation catches your attention. Two men are discussing repairs. Part of the outer wall needs reinforcing. There's mention of a recent skirmish, nothing major, but enough to remind you that castles are not just homes. They are fortresses. Every design choice reflects that. Narrow windows, thick walls, limited entry points. It's all about defense. Comfort comes second, or third, or maybe not at all. Historians still debate how people adapted psychologically to living in these conditions, especially the constant blend of noise, cold, and limited privacy. It's one thing to visit, another to stay. You pass a staircase spiraling upward, tight and uneven. Built deliberately that way, you realize. Defenders would have the advantage against attackers climbing up. Practical. Clever. Slightly inconvenient if you're just trying to get to your room without tripping. Speaking of rooms, you peek into a smaller chamber off the main hall. It's sparse. A bed, if you can call it that. More like a wooden frame with layered fabric. Maybe some furs. A chest for belongings. That's about it. Luxury, in this context, is relative. Even the lord of the castle doesn't live in what you'd consider true comfort. Warmer than most, better fed, certainly more secure, but still surrounded by the same limitations of the era. You step back into the hall as the noise swells again. A dog barks somewhere inside, which feels like a bold choice given everything else going on. Someone laughs loudly. Another person coughs. Again that sound. Always that sound. And yet, life here continues with a strange sense of normalcy. So people adapt. They always do. You pause near the entrance, looking back one last time. For all its stone and strength, the castle doesn't feel like an escape from the world outside. It feels like a different version of the same reality, just slightly elevated, slightly protected, but still deeply human. And as you step back toward the courtyard, you can't help but think, maybe the biggest difference between inside and outside these walls isn't comfort. It's just who gets to pretend things are better. You step out into the courtyard again, and the air feels just a little easier to breathe, though that might be more psychological than anything else. The castle looms behind you, solid and unmoving, but your attention shifts to what's happening at ground level. Because while the nobles sit inside, life, the real, constant, exhausting kind, is unfolding right here. A blacksmith's hammer rings sharply against metal somewhere to your left. Clang. Pause. Clang. It's steady, almost rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the place. You follow the sound, weaving past a pair of boys carrying a bucket that sloshes with something you don't want to identify too closely. The forge comes into view. Heat radiates outward in waves, a stark contrast to the chill inside the castle walls. The blacksmith stands broad and focused, arms moving with practiced precision. Sparks jump into the air with every strike, briefly lighting up the dim space like tiny stars that burn out almost instantly. You linger at the edge, watching. This is one of the most essential jobs in the medieval world. Without blacksmiths, there are no tools, no horseshoes, no weapons, basically no functioning society. Across medieval Europe, skilled metalworkers hold a quiet kind of power. Not glamorous, not celebrated in songs, but absolutely necessary. The blacksmith pauses to wipe sweat from his brow, leaving a dark streak across his face. There's no neat separation between work and discomfort here. Heat, noise, physical strain, it's all part of the job. You imagine doing this for hours every day and immediately feel grateful for, well, anything that doesn't involve molten metal flying near your face. And here's something you probably didn't think about. Blacksmiths often develop strong, asymmetrical bodies. One arm, usually the dominant one, becomes noticeably more muscular over time. It's like an unintentional medieval gym membership, just without the option to cancel. You move on, drawn by another sound, this time a wet, repetitive motion. A tannery. You might want to brace yourself. The smell hits before you even see it. Strong, sharp, unmistakable. If the streets earlier were unpleasant, this is focused unpleasantness, industrial level unpleasantness. Inside, workers are treating animal hides, turning them into leather. It's a long, labor-intensive process involving soaking, scraping, and here's the part that really stays with you, using substances like urine and animal dung to soften the skins. Yes, that's real. Urine contains ammonia, which helps break down the fibers. It's effective. It's also not something you'd casually mention at a dinner party. You watch as a worker stirs a vat with a wooden pole, completely unfazed. This is just another day at work. Historians still debate how people tolerated these conditions long term, or whether the sense of smell simply adapted to a point where it became background noise. You take a subtle step back, then another. Moving on feels like a very good decision. Next, you pass a group of women gathered around a large wooden frame, working with fabric. They're weaving, threading, creating something that will eventually become clothing or household items. The process is slow, detailed, requiring patience and precision. One of them glances up briefly, then returns to her work. There's a quiet focus here, a rhythm that feels almost meditative. Compared to the forge or the tannery, this space feels calmer, but no less demanding. Hours pass in careful repetition, hands moving almost automatically. And here's something easy to overlook. Textile work is one of the most widespread and essential industries of the time. Clothing isn't mass-produced. Every piece takes time, effort, and skill. Across Europe, entire economies revolve around fabric production. You run your fingers lightly over a finished piece hanging nearby. It's rougher than what you're used to, but sturdy, built to last, not to impress. As you continue through the courtyard, you notice a man hunched over a low table, carefully trimming something small and delicate. You move closer and realize he's a cobbler, repairing shoes. Given what you've seen on the streets, that suddenly feels like one of the most important jobs of all. Your shoes, if you were actually living here, would not survive long. The cobbler works with quiet concentration, occasionally glancing at the worn soles in front of him as if assessing their life story. Every tear, every crack tells a story of where someone has walked, probably through things you'd rather not think about again. You almost smile at that thought. Almost. A cart rolls past, pulled by a tired-looking horse. The driver barely acknowledges anyone as he moves along, focused on his route. Goods need to be delivered. Work needs to be done. There's no pause, no real break in the flow of activity, and that's when it really sinks in. There's no such thing as a day off in the way you understand it. No weekends, no structured rest. Life here is a continuous cycle of labor, necessity, and survival. Even children are part of this rhythm. You spot a young boy struggling to carry a bundle that looks just slightly too heavy for him. No one rushes to help. Not out of cruelty, but because this is normal. This is how you learn. Historians still debate how people balance this constant workload with their sense of well-being, whether they found moments of rest in small, quiet ways or simply accepted exhaustion as a baseline state. You slow your pace, taking it all in. Each job, each task, each person contributes to something larger. It's not always visible, not always appreciated, but it's there. A system built not on convenience, but on necessity. You pass the forge again, the hammer still striking. Clang, pause, clang. It's steady, unchanging. And as you move toward the edge of the courtyard, back toward the winding streets beyond, you realize something quietly profound. In this world, survival isn't about doing one thing well. It's about doing whatever needs to be done, again and again, without expecting it to ever get easier. You drift back toward the street again, the steady clang of the blacksmith fading behind you, replaced by a different kind of noise, louder, sharper, more focused. A crowd. You don't even need to see it yet to know something is happening. In this world, crowds rarely gather without a reason, and that reason is often something you might not be entirely comfortable witnessing. Still, you move closer, slowly. The street opens into a small square, and there it is, a wooden platform raised just high enough for everyone to see. People stand shoulder to shoulder, murmuring, shifting, craning their necks for a better view. There's a strange energy in the air. Not quite excitement, not quite dread. Something in between. You find a place at the edge. That feels safe enough. At the center of the platform stands a man, his hands locked into a wooden frame that holds his head and wrists in place. A pillory. You've probably seen images of it before, maybe even thought of it as a slightly comical form of punishment. Standing here now, it doesn't feel very funny. This is public punishment, common across medieval Europe, and it's designed less to injure the body and more to expose the person to humiliation. The crime might be something relatively minor: theft, fraud, speaking out of turn, sometimes even just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The real penalty isn't the wood locking you in place, it's everyone else. A woman near the front tosses something. It hits the man's shoulder with a soft thud. Not a stone, something softer. Rotten fruit, maybe. That's when you notice the ground near the platform. It's scattered with scraps, spoiled vegetables, things no one wants anymore. Except apparently for this. Another throw. This one lands closer. The crowd reacts, not with horror, but with a kind of casual participation. Some laugh, some shout, others just watch, arms crossed, as if this is simply part of the day's routine. You feel a strange tension in your chest. It's not just what's happening, it's how normal it seems. And here's something that rarely gets talked about. These punishments are meant to involve the community. Justice isn't distant or abstract. It's immediate, visible, and shared. Everyone becomes part of it, whether they act or just observe. Historians still debate whether this kind of public shaming was more effective than harsher physical punishments, or if it simply reinforced social order through fear and conformity. You shift your weight, watching as the man tries to turn his head slightly, as if searching for a face in the crowd that might show some sympathy. It's hard to tell if he finds one. Not all punishments are like this, of course. Some are far more severe. Whippings, branding, even execution in extreme cases. But the pillory sits in a strange middle ground, painful, humiliating, but survivable. A lesson, not an ending, at least most of the time. Because sometimes the crowd goes too far. A boy nearby winds up and throws something harder. It strikes the wooden frame with a sharp crack. The man flinches. No one stops the boy. No one intervenes. There's an unspoken line here, but it's blurry, shifting depending on mood, on numbers, on the moment. You glance around. A few people look uncomfortable. Most don't. And then you notice something else. Someone taking mental note. A figure standing slightly apart, watching carefully. Authority. Not intervening, just observing. Making sure the punishment runs its course, but not necessarily controlling every detail. It's a delicate balance. Order maintained not just by rules, but by shared expectation. You step back slightly, the noise pressing in on you. It's not overwhelming, but it's persistent. Like a low hum that doesn't quite fade. A voice rises above the rest, someone reading out the offense. The words are formal, practiced, but the meaning is simple. This person broke the rules, and now everyone gets to see the consequence. You think about how differently things work where you come from. Punishments hidden behind walls, carried out by systems you rarely see. Here, there's no distance, no separation. Everything is out in the open. And maybe that changes something. Maybe it makes people more aware, or maybe it just makes them more used to it. You're not sure which is worse. Another piece of fruit flies through the air. This one misses, landing near your feet. You look down at it for a moment, then back up at the platform. For a brief second, you imagine yourself up there. It doesn't take much. A misunderstanding, a small mistake, a moment of bad luck. In a world like this, the line between observer and participant can be thinner than you'd like. You take another step back, then another, easing your way out of the crowd. The noise softens slightly as you move away, though it never fully disappears. Behind you, the event continues. It will run its course, as it always does. The man will be released eventually, marked not just by the experience, but by the memory of everyone who saw it. Reputation here is fragile, and once broken, it doesn't easily repair. You turn down a quieter street, letting the sounds fade into the background. For a moment, the town feels different again, less crowded, less intense, but you know better now. The calm isn't a separate reality. It's just what things look like when no one's being watched. You keep walking, letting the noise of the square dissolve behind you, replaced once again by the quieter, uneven rhythm of daily life. Your pace slows, not because you're tired exactly, but because something in you has adjusted. The urgency fades, the need to rush disappears. You begin to move the way people here move, steady, deliberate, with nowhere particularly urgent to be, and yet always something waiting to be done. A narrow path curves away from the main street, leading toward a cluster of smaller buildings. You follow it, partly out of curiosity, partly because the air feels slightly less crowded here. Slightly. That's when you notice a large wooden structure with a faint curl of steam drifting from its roof. A bathhouse. Now, before you get too excited, you should probably adjust your expectations just a little. This is not a spa day. There are no scented candles, no calming music, and definitely no neatly folded towels waiting for you. But still, this is as close as medieval life gets to intentional cleanliness. You step inside. The warmth hits you first. It's thick, humid, wrapping around you in a way that feels almost comforting after the cool, damp air outside. For a brief moment, it's actually nice. Inside, a few people move about casually. Some are already soaking in large wooden tubs. Others sit nearby, talking quietly, as if this is both a practical task and a social one. And in a way, it is. Bathing here isn't just about hygiene. It's about gathering, relaxing, sharing space. Across parts of medieval Europe, bathhouses play an important role in daily life, though their popularity rises and falls over time. Sometimes they're encouraged, sometimes they're viewed with suspicion, but right now, in this moment, they're simply part of the routine. You move closer to one of the tubs, peering in. The water is not exactly clear. It's warm, yes. Slightly cloudy, also yes. And here's the part that might make you hesitate. The same water is often shared by multiple people, sequentially. You imagine the order suddenly becoming very important. A man nearby splashes his face, seemingly unbothered. Another leans back in the water, eyes closed, as if this is the most peaceful moment he's had all day. Maybe it is. And here's something that might surprise you. People in the medieval world do bathe more often than the stereotype suggests. Not constantly, not daily in the modern sense, but regularly enough that cleanliness isn't completely ignored. The idea that no one ever bathed is a bit exaggerated. However, the methods and frequency vary widely depending on location, status, and time period. And yes, sometimes long gaps between baths do happen, especially during colder months or in areas where water access is limited. Historians still debate just how common regular bathing was and how attitudes toward cleanliness shifted over time, particularly as concerns about disease began to influence behavior. You notice a small table near the wall with items laid out: cloths, simple soaps made from animal fat and ash, maybe some herbs. Nothing luxurious, but functional. Everything here is about function. You dip your fingers lightly into a nearby basin. The warmth spreads quickly, and for a second, it feels grounding. Familiar, even. Water has a way of doing that, no matter the century. Then you remember the sharing situation and slowly withdraw your hand. A quiet conversation drifts toward you. Two people discussing rumors, something about illness spreading in another town. Again, that thread appears. Disease. Always just slightly out of sight, but never fully gone. There's a reason bathhouses sometimes fall out of favor. In certain periods, people begin to associate them with the spread of sickness, even if the connection isn't fully understood. The idea that warm, shared spaces might carry risk isn't entirely wrong. It's just not explained the way we would today. You shift your attention and notice something else: the lack of urgency. No one is rushing through this. Bathing takes time. Heating water takes effort. Everything here moves slower, more deliberately. A child laughs somewhere behind you, splashing water with a kind of joy that feels completely detached from everything else you've seen so far. For a moment, the world feels lighter, simpler. And then someone coughs again. It's softer this time, but you hear it. You always hear it now. You step back toward the entrance, letting the cooler air slip in around you. The contrast is immediate. The warmth fades, replaced by the familiar chill of the outside world. As you leave, you glance back one last time. The steam, the quiet voices, the slow movement, it all lingers for a moment before the door closes behind you. Out here, the street feels the same as before. Mud, movement, distant noise. Nothing has changed, and yet something has. You've seen another layer now, another attempt at balance in a world that doesn't make it easy. Clean, but not quite clean. Safe, but not entirely safe. You take a breath, carefully, out of habit more than necessity, and start walking again. Because the day isn't even close to over yet. You move on from the bathhouse, the warmth fading from your skin as the cooler air settles in again. For a brief moment, you consider how strange it is that something as simple as warm water can feel like a luxury. Then your stomach reminds you, quietly but persistently, that whatever you had earlier has already begun to wear off. Food here isn't a one-time event. It's a constant calculation. You follow the familiar pull of activity and smell, drifting toward a line of small stalls forming along the side of the street. This isn't quite a formal market, not in the grand sense, but it's where people gather to trade what they have for what they need. A woman waves you over without much ceremony. In front of her, laid out on a rough wooden board, are items that look edible, mostly. You lean closer. There's a pile of something that resembles cheese, though the color is slightly off from what you're used to. A loaf of bread, darker and denser than the one from earlier, and a small dish of preserved fish, glistening faintly in the light. You hesitate, just for a second. Then curiosity wins again. The cheese is handed to you in a small piece. You take a bite. It's sharp, strong, a little sour but not unpleasant. In fact, it's one of the more flavorful things you've tasted so far. And here's something interesting. Preservation is everything in this world. Without refrigeration, people rely heavily on salting, drying, smoking, and fermenting food. Across medieval Europe, entire diets are shaped by what can last, not necessarily what tastes best. You glance at the fish. It's been heavily salted, which means it can travel and be stored longer. It also means it's going to be intense. You take a cautious bite. Yes, intense is the right word. Your face almost reacts before you can stop it. Salty, dense, slightly chewy. It's the kind of flavor that doesn't ask for your approval. It just arrives and stays for a while. The woman watches you with mild interest, as if assessing whether you're going to finish it or politely pretend you enjoyed it. You do your best to look appreciative. Nearby, another stall offers something that catches your attention for a different reason: color. Bright, almost unnaturally vibrant compared to everything else. You move closer and realize it's a pie, decorated with dyed crust. This is where things get a little creative. Medieval cooks sometimes use natural dyes to make food more visually appealing. Saffron for yellow, herbs for green, even crushed insects for red. It's not just about taste. It's about impression. Presentation matters, even when resources are limited. You consider trying it, then pause. Something about the color feels slightly too enthusiastic. Historians still debate how much of medieval cuisine was driven by necessity versus experimentation, whether unusual combinations were intentional or simply the result of using whatever was available at the time. You step aside as a man pushes through the crowd, carrying a small sack that clinks softly. Coins. Trade here isn't always direct exchange. Currency exists, though not everyone has equal access to it. Bartering still plays a huge role. A loaf of bread for a bundle of herbs, a piece of cloth for a tool repair. Value is flexible, shifting depending on need, availability, and negotiation skills. You overhear a brief argument nearby, two people disagreeing over the worth of a chicken. It's surprisingly intense for something that in your world would be a quick transaction. But here, that chicken represents more than just food. It's time, effort, survival. You step back, letting the movement flow around you. The market isn't chaotic exactly, but it's alive in a way that feels constantly in motion. No fixed structure, no clear boundaries, just people, goods, and the ongoing exchange between them. And then something unexpected, a sweet smell. You follow it, weaving past a group of children clustered around a stall. There, on a small tray, are honeyed treats, simple, sticky, slightly uneven. You take one. The taste is immediate and comforting. Sweetness, in a world where it's not always easy to come by. Honey is one of the few reliable sources, and it carries a kind of quiet value. For a moment, everything else fades. The smells, the noise, the complexity, it all softens into something simpler. Then someone bumps into you, and the moment breaks. You look around again, more aware now of how layered this place is. Food here isn't just about eating. It's about trade, preservation, status, creativity, and sometimes just getting through the day without going hungry. You glance back at the fish, still lingering in your hand, and consider finishing it. You decide, maybe later, or maybe never. A cart rolls past, wheels creaking under the weight of something covered in cloth. You don't ask what it is. Some things are better left to the imagination. As you step away from the stalls, the noise begins to thin out again. The street stretches ahead, familiar in its unpredictability. And as you walk, you realize something quietly amusing. Your standards for food have already started to shift. Not dramatically, not completely, but just enough that what once seemed strange is starting to feel almost normal. You leave the market behind, the taste of honey still lingering faintly, softening the sharper edges of everything else you've tried today. The street narrows again, pulling you into a quieter stretch of town where the noise becomes more scattered. Voices behind doors, footsteps above creaking floors, the occasional murmur drifting through open windows. There's something different about this part of the day. The pace hasn't slowed exactly, but it feels more personal. Less about trade, more about life unfolding in smaller, quieter ways. You pass a doorway where voices spill out, low, steady, almost conversational. You hesitate for a moment, then step closer, just enough to listen without being seen. Inside, a small gathering. A man and a woman sit across from each other, hands folded, expressions calm but measured. Around them, a few others watch, family, maybe. Witnesses. This isn't a casual visit, this is negotiation. Marriage in this world is rarely about spontaneous affection. It's structured, deliberate, shaped by family, status, and necessity. Across medieval Europe, unions are often arranged with practical goals in mind: land, alliances, stability. Love, if it appears, tends to come later, or sometimes not at all. You listen as terms are discussed, not in cold transactional language exactly, but close enough. There's mention of property, of responsibilities, of expectations. It's less, do you like each other? And more, will this arrangement work? And strangely, no one seems particularly upset about that. Because this is normal. The man nods slowly. The woman lowers her gaze, not in submission exactly, but in a kind of quiet acceptance. It's not that feelings don't exist, it's that they're not the foundation everything else is built on. Historians still debate how people in this period experienced love within these structures, whether emotional connection grew naturally over time, or whether it was simply less emphasized compared to duty and survival. You step back slightly, giving them space, though the conversation continues at the same steady pace. There's no dramatic tension, no raised voices, just agreement taking shape. Further down the street, you notice a different kind of interaction. A couple walking side by side, not touching, but close. There's a subtle rhythm to their steps, a familiarity. They exchange a few quiet words, and for a moment, something softer appears. So maybe love does exist here. It just looks different. You follow them at a distance, not intentionally, just moving in the same direction. They stop near a small stall, speaking briefly with the vendor before continuing on. Everyday life. Shared, but not overly displayed. And then a small detail catches your attention. The woman adjusts a simple ring on her hand. Not ornate, not particularly valuable, but meaningful. A symbol, not just of union, but of belonging. To a person, to a family, to a structure larger than either of them. You glance around and notice others wearing similar markers. Some more elaborate, some barely noticeable. Each one carrying its own quiet story. Nearby, a group of women gathers around a well, drawing water and talking softly. Their conversation drifts toward you in fragments. Daily concerns, small frustrations, bits of humor woven in between. One of them laughs, a light, genuine sound that cuts through everything else. It feels familiar, timeless even. For a moment, the centuries between you and them seem to shrink. Because despite all the differences, the structure, the expectations, the limitations, some things remain unchanged. People still seek connection, still share moments, still find ways to laugh. You move on, the image of the quiet negotiation still lingering in your mind. It's easy to judge it by modern standards, to see what's missing rather than what's present. But here, in this context, it works. Not perfectly, not always happily, but consistently enough to sustain a society. A door closes somewhere behind you, the sound echoing briefly before fading. Another begins to open ahead. Life continuing, one moment flowing into the next without pause. And as you walk, you realize something subtle but important. In this world, love isn't always something you chase. Sometimes, It's something you learn to live with. You continue walking, the quieter rhythm of the street settling into something almost steady, when a sound drifts toward you, low at first, then rising in a slow, deliberate cadence. A bell. Not rushed, not alarmed, just present. You follow it without thinking too much, your steps naturally aligning with its rhythm. The buildings begin to open up again, and ahead of you, rising above everything else, is a structure that feels different from the castle. Less defensive, more watchful. A church. Its stone walls stretch upward with quiet authority, not to keep people out, but to draw them in. And they do. People move toward it steadily, some alone, some in small groups, heads slightly lowered, voices softer now. You step inside. The change is immediate. The air is cooler, stiller. Sound behaves differently here, echoing gently, as if even noise is expected to show respect. Light filters through narrow windows, catching dust in soft beams that drift slowly through the space. For a moment, everything feels calm. Not peaceful in a perfect sense. There's still tension in the world outside, but contained. Like stepping into a place where things make more sense, even if only for a little while. This is the center of life in many parts of medieval Europe. Not just spiritually, but socially, emotionally, even politically. The church isn't separate from daily existence. It's woven into it. Every decision, every fear, every hope passes through here in some way. You move quietly along the side, watching as people kneel, stand, sit, each action deliberate, familiar. Some close their eyes, others whisper prayers under their breath, words shaped by repetition more than spontaneity. And here's something that doesn't always get talked about. Belief here isn't casual. It's not a background detail. It's constant. Heaven and hell are not abstract ideas. They are immediate, real destinations in the minds of the people around you. Every action carries weight. Every mistake has consequences beyond this life. It's a lot to carry. A figure stands near the front, speaking softly but clearly. The words echo through the space, steady and measured. You don't catch every detail, but the tone is unmistakable. Guidance, warning, reassurance, all woven together. Historians still debate how much of this influence was comforting versus controlling, whether the church provided stability in an uncertain world or reinforced fear as a way to maintain order. Maybe it did both. You sit for a moment on a worn wooden bench. The surface is smooth from years of use, shaped by countless people passing through this same space, carrying their own worries, their own questions. A woman nearby clutches something small in her hands. A charm, maybe, or a token. She presses it tightly, eyes closed, lips moving in silent repetition. There's a kind of intensity in her focus that feels deeply personal. Across the aisle, a man bows his head, shoulders slightly tense. You wonder what he's thinking, what he's asking for, what he's hoping to be forgiven for. Because that's another layer to all of this. Guilt. Not always heavy, not always overwhelming, but present. A quiet awareness that actions matter in ways that extend far beyond the moment. You glance upward. The ceiling arches above you, supported by stone that feels both heavy and impossibly stable. It's designed to last, to outlive the people inside it. There's something oddly comforting about that. And then, a shift. The bell sounds again, closer now. The rhythm changes slightly, signaling something you don't fully understand but instinctively feel. People begin to move, adjusting their positions, preparing for what comes next. The structure of it all becomes clear. This isn't random. It's patterned, repeated, known. A sequence that guides people through something larger than themselves. You notice a child fidgeting beside his parent, clearly struggling to match the stillness of the space. He glances around, eyes curious, distracted. For a second, you almost smile. Some things, it seems, don't change, no matter the century. The voice at the front continues, steady as ever. Words layered with meaning, shaped by tradition, reinforced by repetition. And as you sit there, listening without fully understanding, you begin to feel something subtle but powerful. This place doesn't just reflect belief. It creates it, reinforces it, holds it in place day after day, year after year. You stand slowly, careful not to disrupt the quiet rhythm around you. As you make your way toward the exit, the outside world begins to press back in. Noise, movement, unpredictability. But something lingers. Not certainty exactly, not even comfort. Just the sense that, in a world this uncertain, people need something solid to hold on to. And here, within these walls, they've built exactly that. You step back outside, and the world feels louder again, like someone gently turned the volume back up while you weren't looking. The bell fades behind you, but its rhythm lingers in your mind, echoing faintly as you continue down the street. For a moment, you consider staying nearby, keeping that quiet sense of structure close. But the town pulls you forward again. It always does. You follow a road that stretches toward the edge of the settlement, where the buildings begin to thin and the ground opens up into something less controlled. The air changes here, less crowded, though not necessarily cleaner, just wider. A wooden gate stands ahead, marking the boundary between what is considered inside and everything beyond. You pass through it almost without noticing, and suddenly, the town is behind you. And just like that, things feel different. The road becomes rougher, less maintained. The sounds of daily life fade, replaced by wind brushing through grass, the distant call of birds, and the creak of your own steps on uneven ground. Travel in this world is not something people do lightly. Across medieval Europe, leaving the safety of a town or village comes with real risk, not just inconvenience, risk. You walk for a while, the path stretching ahead with no clear end in sight. There are no signs, no markers, no reassuring sense that you're heading in the right direction. Just a road that exists because enough people have walked it before. And even that is not guaranteed. You pass a broken cart at the side of the path, one wheel missing, the wood splintered. It's been here for a while, long enough that grass has started to grow around it. No one has come back for it. You don't ask why. A figure appears in the distance, moving toward you slowly. As he gets closer, you notice the way he carries himself, alert, cautious. He nods briefly as he passes, but his eyes linger just a second longer than you expect. Not unfriendly, just aware. Out here, every stranger is a question. Banditry is not uncommon. Roads like this can attract people looking for opportunity in less structured ways. There are no regular patrols, no immediate help if something goes wrong. You are, for the most part, on your own. Historians still debate how frequent these encounters actually were and whether the fear of them was sometimes greater than the reality. But the possibility is enough. It shapes behavior. It changes how people move, how they think. You find yourself glancing over your shoulder, not out of panic, just instinct. Further along, you come across a small group traveling together, 2 men, a woman, and a cart pulled by a tired horse. They stay close, speaking quietly among themselves. There's safety in numbers here, even if it's not guaranteed. You slow your pace slightly, letting them move ahead, not wanting to intrude, but also not entirely comfortable being alone. The road dips gently, leading you through a stretch of trees. The light shifts as branches filter the sun, creating patterns that move with the wind. It's quiet here, almost too quiet. And then, a sound, not loud, just a snap, somewhere off the path. You stop. Nothing follows. No movement, no voices, just the faint rustle of leaves settling back into place. You wait a second longer than you need to. Then you keep walking. Because that's what people do here. They keep moving. They don't stop for every uncertainty, or they'd never get anywhere at all. Eventually, the trees thin and the road begins to rise again, leading you toward another cluster of buildings in the distance. A smaller settlement, maybe? Or just a stopping point. You don't need to go all the way there to understand what it represents. Distance in this world is not just measured in miles. It's measured in effort, in time, in risk. A journey that would take you an hour today might take a full day here, or longer depending on conditions, weather, and luck. You think about how easily you move in your own world, how quickly you cross distances without even noticing them. Here, every step counts. You turn slightly, looking back the way you came. The town is barely visible now, just a suggestion on the horizon. For a brief moment, you feel something unexpected. Not fear exactly, not even discomfort, just distance. A quiet awareness that once you leave a place like that, returning isn't always simple. You stand there for a second longer, then begin to make your way back. The path is the same, but it feels different now. More familiar, maybe? Or maybe you're just more aware of what it holds. And as you walk, you realize something subtle but important. In this world, travel isn't just about getting somewhere else. It's about everything that might happen before you arrive. You make your way back through the gate, and the shift is immediate again. The open air narrows into streets, the quiet stretches into layered sound, and the distant uncertainty of the road folds back into something more contained, though not necessarily safer. The light has begun to change. Not dramatically yet, but enough that shadows stretch a little longer across the ground, slipping between buildings and settling into corners that were easy to ignore earlier. Evening is approaching, and with it, a different kind of awareness. You notice it first in the way people move. There's a subtle urgency now. Not panic, not rush, but intention. Tasks are being finished. Goods are being packed away. Doors open and close more frequently as people begin to retreat indoors. Because night, here, is not just the absence of daylight. It's a shift in how the world works. Across medieval Europe, darkness brings with it a set of risks that most people prefer not to face unless they have to. Without street lighting, without organized patrols in many places, visibility drops quickly, and with it, a sense of control. You continue down the street, noticing how familiar spaces begin to feel slightly different. The same buildings, the same paths, but softened, blurred at the edges. A vendor hastily gathers what remains of his goods, wrapping them in cloth and securing them with practiced movements. Nearby, a woman calls out to a child who lingers just a little too long outside. Her voice carries a note of urgency now. Inside. Time to go inside. You pass a doorway where a faint glow flickers from within, candlelight. It spills out just enough to outline the shape of the entrance, but not enough to reach far beyond it. Light here is local, limited. You step carefully, more aware now of the ground beneath you. What was merely inconvenient earlier becomes harder to navigate in low light. That familiar mixture of mud and debris hasn't gone anywhere. It's just less visible, and that makes it more dangerous. A man brushes past you quickly, head down, moving with purpose. No eye contact, no pause. The kind of movement that says, I know where I'm going, and I'm not stopping until I get there. You find yourself doing the same. There's a natural pull toward shelter now, toward walls, toward anything that feels defined and enclosed. Open space loses its comfort as the light fades. And then, a sound. Footsteps behind you. You slow slightly. They slow too. Not immediately suspicious, but noticeable. You resist the urge to turn around too quickly. Instead, you shift your path subtly, stepping aside near a doorway as if giving space. The figure passes. A quick glance. Nothing more. Just another person trying to get somewhere before darkness settles fully in. Still, your awareness lingers. Because here's the thing. Night changes behavior. Not just because of visibility, but because of opportunity. With fewer eyes watching, fewer people moving about, the balance shifts. Historians still debate how dangerous medieval nights truly were, whether crime increased significantly after dark, or whether the fear of it played a larger role in shaping behavior. But again, the perception is enough. People act accordingly. You turn a corner and notice a group gathered near a doorway, speaking in low tones. Their faces are partially hidden in shadow, expressions harder to read. It's not necessarily threatening, but it's not entirely comfortable either. You keep walking. The sky deepens in color, shifting toward that in-between state where shapes are still visible, but details begin to fade. It's a slow transition, but unmistakable. Somewhere in the distance, a door slams shut, another follows. The sounds echo more now, traveling farther in the thinning noise of the evening. You notice a small lantern being lit near the entrance of a building. The flame flickers uncertainly at first, then steadies. It casts a soft circle of light, just enough to mark a boundary between inside and out. You pause near it for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. There's comfort in that small glow, limited but real. And then you realize, this is what people rely on. Small, contained pockets of light in a much larger field of darkness. Not enough to eliminate the unknown, but enough to navigate through it. A dog barks somewhere nearby, the sound sharper in the quiet. You hear movement in the distance, quick, indistinct. Then nothing again. The town is settling, not fully asleep, but quieter, more cautious. You resume walking, your steps slower now, more deliberate. Every sound carries a little further. Every shadow feels slightly more present. And yet, there's something else here too. A kind of stillness that only comes when the day begins to release its hold. The constant motion softens, the noise fades, the world for a brief time feels like it's holding its breath. You pass another doorway, light spilling out, voices drifting gently into the street. Inside, people gather, talking, eating, existing within their small, defined spaces. Outside, you keep moving. Because in a place like this, night isn't something you stop. It's something you move through carefully, quietly, and always just a little more aware than before. You keep moving, letting the dim glow of scattered candlelight guide your steps. When something shifts, not in the street itself, but in the feeling beneath it. It's subtle at first. A door that doesn't open, a voice that doesn't answer, a window that stays closed a little longer than expected. Night has settled now, and with it comes a quieter kind of unease. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. You pass a narrow house where no light escapes at all. Not unusual on its own, but something about it lingers in your mind. You slow slightly, listening. Nothing. No movement, no voices, not even the soft shuffle you've come to expect from occupied spaces. You move on, but the silence follows. Because in this world, absence can be as noticeable as presence. Further down the street, you catch a fragment of conversation drifting from an open doorway. Low voices. Serious. You don't mean to listen, but the words carry just enough. Another one. Fever. Gone by morning. The phrases hang in the air, unfinished but heavy. You don't need the full story to understand the shape of it. Illness again. But this time, it feels closer. Less like a distant possibility, more like something moving quietly through the spaces between people. Across medieval Europe, outbreaks of disease are not rare events. They come in waves, sometimes small, sometimes devastating, leaving behind questions that no one can fully answer. You continue walking, but your awareness sharpens. Every sound seems more significant now, every absence more noticeable. A figure passes you quickly, wrapped tightly in a cloak despite the mild evening air. Their face is partially covered, not unusual, but now it catches your attention in a different way. Protection? Fear? Habit? It's hard to tell. You turn another corner and find a small group gathered around a doorway. No raised voices. No panic, just quiet concern. One person knocks gently, then again. No response. No one forces the door. Instead, they wait. There's a kind of hesitation here that speaks volumes. Not just uncertainty, but caution. Because opening that door might not just reveal what's inside. It might bring something out. Historians still debate how communities responded to early signs of disease, whether caution slowed its spread, or whether fear sometimes made things worse. But in moments like this, hesitation feels almost instinctive. You take a step back, giving them space, though you're not sure what space really means in a place like this. The air feels heavier now. Not physically, not in a way you can measure, but perceptibly. As if something unseen has settled into the background. You pass a small shrine set into the wall, candles flickering weakly in front of it. Someone has left flowers, wilted slightly, but still carefully placed. A quiet offering, a request, maybe both. Nearby, a man mutters to himself, fingers brushing over a string of beads. Repetition. Comfort. Something to hold on to when explanations fall short. Because that's the thing about illness here. It doesn't follow clear rules, at least not ones people understand. It appears, spreads, fades, returns. Unpredictable. And in that unpredictability, people search for meaning. Some blame the air. Some blame fate. Some look inward, wondering what they might have done to deserve it. You move past another darkened window, and for a brief second you think you see movement behind it. Then nothing. Just reflection. Your own reflection, maybe. You keep walking. The street feels longer now, even though it hasn't changed. The shadows stretch deeper, the spaces between light sources wider. And then, in the distance, you hear it. A cart. Not unusual. But the timing, the stillness around it, something feels different. It rolls slowly, wheels creaking softly, pulled by a single figure who doesn't look up. Covered shapes rest in the back, partially hidden beneath cloth. You don't look too closely. You don't need to. The cart passes without stopping, without announcement, without acknowledgement. Just movement through the night, carrying something away. You stand still for a moment after it's gone. Not out of fear exactly, more like recognition. This is part of it too. Not always visible, not always spoken about, but present. You take a breath, slow, careful, and continue walking. Because in this world, life doesn't pause for uncertainty. It moves alongside it, through it. And as you step forward, the quiet settles in again. Not empty, not peaceful, but full of things you can't quite see. Things that are there, whether you understand them or not. You keep walking, long after the cart disappears into the dark, its quiet presence lingering in your thoughts like a question no one quite answers. The street stretches ahead, dim and uneven, shaped more by memory now than sight, and yet something begins to change again. Not in the buildings, not in the path beneath your feet, but in the way people respond to what they don't understand. Because where uncertainty exists, belief follows. You notice it first in the small details. A bundle of herbs tied above a doorway, swaying gently in the night air. A symbol scratched faintly into the wood beside it. Simple, almost casual, but clearly intentional. Protection. Or at least the hope of it. You pause, studying it for a moment. These kinds of practices are everywhere across medieval Europe, woven into daily life so naturally that they barely stand out unless you're looking for them. People don't always separate the physical from the spiritual. One blends into the other, creating a world where unseen forces feel just as real as anything you can touch. You move on, noticing more signs as you go. A string of dried plants hanging from a window. A small pouch tied tightly and tucked into a corner of a doorway. Objects placed not randomly but deliberately, each one carrying meaning, even if that meaning isn't always clear. And here's something quietly fascinating. These beliefs aren't necessarily seen as strange or irrational by the people who hold them. They're practical, functional, a way to interact with a world that doesn't always offer clear explanations. Historians still debate how widespread specific superstitions were and how much they varied from place to place, but the underlying idea remains consistent. When knowledge is limited, belief fills the space. You turn a corner and spot an elderly woman sitting just outside her home, a small fire burning beside her. The light flickers across her face, highlighting lines that speak of years spent observing, remembering, adapting. She doesn't look surprised to see you. In fact, she studies you for a moment, as if measuring something you can't quite see. Then, without a word, she reaches down and picks up a small object, something wrapped in cloth, and places it gently on the ground near the edge of the doorway. An offering? A warning? You're not sure. You nod slightly, unsure of the correct response, and continue on. Behind you, the fire crackles softly, the sound blending into the quiet rhythm of the night. Further ahead, you notice a group gathered around another small light source. Their voices are low, almost conspiratorial. You catch fragments as you pass, mentions of signs, of omens, of things seen and not seen. One person swears they heard something moving outside their home the night before. Another insists it was just the wind. A third isn't so sure. And just like that, uncertainty turns into story. You've already seen how information moves in this world, through conversation, through repetition, through shared experience. But belief moves even faster. It doesn't need proof. It just needs enough people to consider the possibility. You keep walking, the path familiar now in its unpredictability. The same streets, the same shapes, but layered with new meaning. A shadow shifts near the edge of your vision. You turn quickly, only to find nothing there. Just a corner, a wall, a slight movement of fabric caught in the breeze. Still, your awareness sharpens, because once the idea is there, that something might be present, unseen, it doesn't leave easily. You pass another doorway, this one marked with a symbol drawn in chalk. Fresh, recently placed. Someone took the time to do this tonight. Protection against what? The question lingers, unanswered. And maybe that's the point. Not everything needs a clear definition. Sometimes the act itself is enough, a gesture, a way of saying, I'm doing something, even if I don't fully understand what I'm facing. You slow your pace, letting the quiet settle around you again. The town feels different now, not just because of the darkness, but because of everything that fills it, seen and unseen, known and unknown. And as you walk, you begin to understand something subtle but powerful. In a world where so much is uncertain, belief isn't just about faith, it's about control, or at least the feeling of it. You keep walking, but now your steps are slower, softer, less about getting somewhere, more about simply moving through what remains of the night. The streets feel familiar in a way they didn't before. Not because they've changed, but because you have. The sounds have thinned out even more. No shouting now, no carts, just the occasional shift of wood, a distant murmur behind closed doors, and the quiet rhythm of your own footsteps. The town is resting, not completely silent, never completely, but settled. like a body easing into sleep, still aware, but no longer alert. You pass the same narrow alley from earlier, the one where you first heard that lingering cough. It's darker now, almost entirely swallowed by shadow. You don't stop this time. You don't need to. Some places don't ask for a second visit. Instead, you continue forward, guided less by sight and more by memory. The path curves gently, leading you back toward the center, though it doesn't feel as crowded anymore. The space seems wider at night, even if nothing has physically moved. A faint glow appears ahead, one of the last remaining lights still burning. You approach it slowly, noticing how the flame flickers in a small lantern, its light barely reaching beyond a few steps. It's enough. You pause beside it, letting the warmth brush against your hands. It's subtle, but real. And for a moment, everything else fades. The smells, the uncertainty, the weight of everything you've seen. Just light. Just warmth and quiet. You think back over the day, not as a sequence of events, but as impressions. The muddy streets at dawn, the rough bread, the healer's steady hands, the cold stone of the castle, the rhythm of work, the weight of watching punishment unfold, the brief comfort of warm water, the strange intensity of preserved food, the quiet negotiation of lives joined together, the stillness of the church, the uncertainty of the road, the shifting mood of night, the quiet presence of illness, the small, persistent signs of belief, all of it layered together, not neatly, not perfectly, but completely. This is what life feels like here, not dramatic in every moment, not defined by a single event, but constant, textured, sometimes harsh, sometimes unexpectedly gentle. You move on again, leaving the lantern behind. The darkness feels softer now, not because it's changed, but because you're no longer resisting it. Your steps slow even further. There's nowhere left to go tonight. No new corner to turn, no new scene waiting to unfold. Just the quiet continuation of everything that already is. A window above you lets out a faint line of light before it, too, disappears. One by one, the small signals of wakefulness fade. The town exhales. You find a place to pause, not a destination, just a moment. And as you stand there, the world around you begins to blur slightly. Not visually, not in a way you can point to, but in feeling. The edges soften, the details loosen their grip, your breathing slows. The air feels cooler now, gentler, and the thoughts that once moved quickly, observing, questioning, reacting, begin to settle into something quieter. There's nothing left to figure out, nothing left to analyze, just presence. You let your shoulders drop slightly, the tension you didn't realize you were holding easing away. The ground beneath you feels steady, familiar, and in that stillness, the world doesn't feel distant anymore. It feels complete. Not perfect, not easy, but whole. The sounds fade further, the darkness deepens, and you begin to drift, not away from this place, but gently out of it, as if the story itself is loosening its hold, allowing you to rest. Your steps stop, your breath slows, and the quiet wraps around you, soft and steady, like a blanket you didn't realize you needed. There's no final moment, no clear ending, just a gradual fading. A gentle closing of the day, a quiet invitation to let go. And as everything settles into stillness, you find yourself drifting a little further, a little softer, carried by the rhythm of a world that, for a short while, you walk through. Now you rest.